The U.S. military has a massive decision they need to make in the next few months. Now, whenever we think about operations with the U.S. military, our minds usually go to the last 20 years of us working in the Middle East, or now new developing conflicts in the Pacific, maybe in Syria, but you never really hear about Africa. Now, we tend to generalize Africa, and the U.S. military is really all over Africa. But one particular region that you probably never hear about is called Sahel Africa. And Sahel Africa is by far the most dangerous place on earth. Now, again, I am not trying to generalize Africa because people are like, oh, Africa, we know it's dangerous, it's falling apart. This is not true. Africa has a vast amount of culture with a lot of bright people and bright minds throughout the countries of Africa. But unfortunately, in the Sahel region, this is a mission that is extremely crucial to the United States, that if we pull out of Sahel Africa, there's a lot of big implications here. So we're going to go ahead and talk about all of this, and we're going to talk about what the big decision is going to be in Sahel Africa. Now, I'm talking about the country of Niger in particular when I'm talking about the United States, because in Niger Africa, we've been operating in Niger for quite a while. Now, in the last 20 years, again, you probably think about Afghanistan, or you think about Iraq, maybe a little bit of Syria. Maybe some of you know that we are in Africa, but in what capacity? The capacity is almost like a black ops role or a special forces role, where we are helping in the region of Sahel to be stable, to make sure that countries are not falling apart. But there are new enemies and new trends that are happening throughout the Sahel region that the United States, again, is sort of being pinned into a corner. So let me go ahead and get to what the issue is. In Niger Africa, the French military has been kicked out. Now, there's a lot of countries that have started to fall apart in Africa and the Sahel region that have fallen to a coup or coups. And a lot of these countries seem to be aligned with France or used to be former French colonies. Now, some people speculate it's not really that this is the French's fault. A lot of people say this is all the French's fault, why these countries are falling apart. Nonetheless, there is a French tie there. But when you look at the countries that have fallen to coups in Africa, they all seem to be in the Sahel belt or the Sahel region. Now, the French military is being kicked out of Sahel. You even have the ambassador of France, who was quote-unquote held hostage, according to the French president. He's out of Niger, which that is the first step to pull all assets out, French assets. Now, the French, they are a massive ally to the United States. I know that we sort of like to pick on the French, that, oh, they like to retreat. You need to understand that the French have had a lot of combat and action in Africa in the modern era of combat, not colonial times, but actually fighting these bad guy militant groups who run the Sahel. And just a stat for you so you guys understand how dangerous it is in this region of Africa. For all the attacks that happen in the Sahel, they make up for 40% of all of these bad guy attacks that happen to good people collectively throughout the world. 40%. That's more combined than the Middle East. So you see why it's important for the United States to be smack dab in the middle of this fight, to fight bad guys. Now, with the French gone, that leaves the United States, and that leaves some German troops and some Italian troops sort of on their own. Because again, the French, they were a major asset, but if the people of Niger don't like you, and now there's a coup who's throwing you out, you gotta go, France, I'm sorry. But they didn't kick out the United States. And this sort of goes to show why the United States has a very tough decision. You have a country who just overthrew their president. They now have a coup, but they like the United States. They want you to be there. But there's a dangerous implication here, because technically and legally, the United States is not allowed to work with coups. See, the United States was like, we're just going to stay silent on all of this. We're not going to even call it a coup. We're going to say it appears to be a coup. It looks like a coup. These are the exact words of the Pentagon. Meanwhile, you had these same coup leaders, the juntas, who were just hating on the French. You had riots happening on French bases, on the French embassy, and they said, you need to leave our country, France, but they didn't say it to the United States. So the United States, what you need to understand is that we've been operating in Niger for quite a long time, really under the noses of everyone. Some people speculate around 2002, some people say as close as 2001, maybe 2003 is how long we've actually had boots on the ground in Niger Africa. That is quite a long time for us to never hear about anything in Niger. But this is the biggest reason why the junta likes the United States. The United States has proven that we are there to fight alongside the people of Niger, the people of Africa, to fight these bad guy groups. Now, I can't say what the names are of these bad guy groups because YouTube doesn't allow it. I can't even say the word to describe the group or the organization as a whole. So please bear with me. I'm not saying bad guy groups on purpose. I have to say it. I'm sorry. So the junta, they like the United States. So it would definitely be a bad thing for the United States now to pull out of Niger because we say, well, we can't work with the junta and the French are not here, because the junta will be like, well, we were nice to you guys and we even allowed you in our country and we worked side by side with you. And you guys also, have had your blood, sweat, and tears poured into this country. Literally, you've had combat operations where U.S. Army soldiers, special forces, didn't make it back home to fight for the Africans. So again, we're in a weird situation. Do we leave Niger Africa or do we stay in Niger Africa? Because here's what happens if we leave Niger Africa as well. The implications could hurt the whole world. And I know you think I'm crazy, but understand this. The United States has a migrant problem of epic proportions. We don't know what to do. We're talking tens of thousands of migrants coming into the United States. The number one false thing about the migrant issue is that they are not all Mexicans. We like to say, oh, the Mexican border, there's Mexicans. That's not true. A lot of them are Africans, Chinese. But to focus on the topic of Africa and the Sahel, you have people leaving the Sahel, particularly in Mali, Burkina Faso, who are coming into the United States because of how insecure the region is, how unstable the region is. So you can see what the implications are with the United States in this region of Africa. If we leave, we make it even more unstable. And so we have this domino effect of people coming into the United States. But what a lot of other people speculate is that you also have Russia in Africa who's causing chaos and mayhem in Africa. You see, wherever Russia goes, we go. We're pretty much trying to block them or stop them. And the really confusing part about all of this is that Niger Africa is probably the most secured nation throughout the Sahel. And we can really directly correlate that to the fact that the United States is there, but also because the French were there. I don't want to hate too much on the French because they did help out a lot. When you look at the countries of Mali and you look at the countries of Burkina Faso, who have aligned themselves with the Russians, Wagner Group, who's sort of around, they are around, those countries get worse and worse and worse, and that affects the United States in Niger. But what makes things even more confusing is that the United States and Russia are fighting the same enemy. You see how things are getting really confusing? Because just like up in Syria, where you had Wagner and the United States fighting those really bad guys that start with the letter I can't say their name, Russia and the United States were fighting the same bad people, but there were times where Russia allowed for those bad people to attack the United States, or didn't forward any sort of information to at least help out the United States. And so we have reason to believe that Russia wants and needs Niger to fall. Because guess what? There's also an oil pipeline that's supposed to be cutting up through the middle of Niger from Nigeria and going straight up into Europe. And of course, Russia cannot allow this to happen because a lot of European countries depend on Russia for energy, to include Turkey, who's in NATO, but still purchases coal from Russia. That's a whole nother story. I don't want to get off topic. So, if the United States leaves Niger, you now have this oil pipeline that's open for anyone to attack. And of course, this is very ironic. United States and oil, of course, they fight hand in hand. But in this particular example, there's a lot of strong implications here that Europe could really suffer because they've invested a lot of money and time in hoping that Nigeria can fuel Europe. Not all of Europe, but some of Europe. Pull some assets away from Russia. So again, where is the United States going to go? They've already sort of hinted that we might be leaving Niger, but we're not sort of forced to leave Niger. Look, at the end of the day, the United States is going to keep fighting and fighting in Niger until it's too late. We've invested a lot of money. We've invested literal souls in that country. People haven't come back. But the United States has said if we have to, we will leave, because we are sort of sitting ducks right now in the country of Niger. We're not allowed to attack the enemy. We're only allowed to defend ourselves, the United States, with drone operations. We're not allowed to leave the wire and go fight the enemy, according to reports right now from the Pentagon and really from Niger. And so as the United States sits and waits, the country of Niger is slowly and slowly falling apart, especially on its border regions and especially close to the capital of Niger in Niamey, which is close to Burkina Faso and close to Mali. So the United States is being put in a corner. Do we leave or do we stay? As the country continues to fall apart, as you have Russian assets who continue to destabilize other African countries who are affecting Niger, I think the United States will have no choice but to eventually go to Nigeria, possibly, or try to figure out some other African nation that'll host the United States, because the problem is only going to get worse and worse. And I think eventually the media will catch on that this is the most dangerous region in the world, and you have to do a little digging to find out some of the news. But if the United States leaves Niger Africa, we're going to have a lot more problems on our own home soil in the United States, but also Europe will be feeling the effects. And that's just going to be one more country that Russia has managed to get into in their attempt of forming a new Soviet Union, as they have said they have wanted to do. So we'll see what happens. Again, the United States, although they are like acting like, everything's okay, everything's good, it's not. Go look up what's happening in Mali. Go look up what's happening in Burkina Faso. The more you pull out military assets, the more a country gets destabilized. And the United States really is the last big asset for Niger to not completely fall apart.